Assalamu alaikum dear students. In previous lecture we discussed the sine function and in which interval this sine function is 1, 1 and on 2. You know that in interval whose length is or in interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2 or intervals whose length is simply pi because minus pi by 2 to pi by 2 its length is pi. The functions this sine function is 1, 1 on 2, like in this interval here in interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2 this sine function is 1, 1 on 2. So when it is 1, 1 on 2 its inverse exists, and the inverse of this function is denoted by sine inverse x. Now today we are going to discuss the graph of this sine inverse x. You know that the domain of this sine inverse is simply minus 1 to 1, minus 1 to 1. That is, if we consider g of x equals to sine inverse x minus arc sine function, here x belongs to minus 1 to 1 because this is the domain of the sine inverse x or sine inverse function, because the codomain or the range of sine function is minus 1 to 1. So when here we will tabulate these points. Now when x is 1, you know that the sine inverse x is pi by 2. When x is minus 1 its value is minus pi by 2, and when x is 0 value of sine inverse 0 is simply 0. So we will locate these uh, points, that is 1 and pi by 2, minus 1 and minus pi by 2, 0 and 1, 0 and 0. Now here domain of this function is minus 1 and 1, minus 1 and 1. So this is here the domain axis, it is minus 1 to 1. Now its codomain is from minus pi by 2 to pi by 2 because we are considering only this portion or the sine function only in interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. Now when x is 0, value of this sine inverse is 0. So it is this point. Now when x is 1, its value is pi by 2, that is this point. And when x is minus 1, its value is minus pi by 2. Minus pi by and minus pi by 2 is this point. So when we join these points, we get this portion or the graph is like this. So this is the required graph in interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. Pi by 2. Also, you know that in interval pi by 2 to 3 pi by 2, this sine inverse, this sine function is 1, 1 on 2 means bijective. So in this interval also its inverse exists. So at pi by 2 value is, when we consider, the same function whose domain is minus 1 to 1 to interval pi by 2 to 3 pi by 2, at this in this interval its graph is like this. Similarly in interval minus 3 pi by 2 to pi by 2, the graph of the function is like this. So in this way you can find, the graph of the sine inverse function, and it looks like this. So this is the required graph of in the given interval. But here we will consider, this only interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. Here in each interval we get this curve. In interval pi by 2 to 3 pi by 2 we get this curve. These curves are simply called as the branches. But the portion of this or the branch which lies or whose values lies in, the interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2, as denoted in this as denoted by this red color. This is called, the principal branch, and the value which lies in minus pi by 2 to pi by 2, it is called as the principal value of the sine inverse function. It is called as the principal inverse or the principal value of the sine inverse function or the sine function. So simply the principal value is like this, and this is here, this curve is called as the principal branch, and its value when it lies between minus pi by 2 to pi by 2, it is called as the principal branch value. This is called as the principal branch value. So simply we can say principal branch value, if we consider only the principal values, then it is actually the function that is sine inverse x from minus 1 to 1 to interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. But if we consider another interval, say for example here we may consider 3 pi by 2 to 5 pi by 2, then this sine function is still 1 1 onto when it is 1 1 1 onto. So we have the inverse function from minus 1 to 1 to 3 pi by 2 to 5 pi by 2. So when we draw the graph for such function, that curve which represents this function, it is simply called as the branch of a curve, branch of sine x, branch of sine inverse x. But if we consider in interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2, it is called as the principal branch value. So this is the principal branch value. So from this we conclude that the value of the sine inverse x which lies in interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2 are called as the principal branch values, or simply the principal values. Hence we conclude that if we consider the sine function, that is f from interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2 to minus 1 to 1, its inverse exists, then its inverse is actually the function from codomain, that is minus 1 to 1 to minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. This is a sine inverse x. We are considering only the principal values. So we can write that if f is function, g is its inverse, then f of g equals to g of f is identity function. Now here f is here sine, g is here sine inverse. So sine of sine inverse x equals to, here we have to consider, in this we have to consider the x in the domain of sine inverse. Now domain of sine inverse is minus 1 to 1. So here sine of sine inverse x is x, but here x is greater or equals to minus 1, less or equals to 1. So x is here the domain of sine inverse x. Also g of f equals to x when g is the inverse. So it is sine inverse of sine x equals to x. But here we have to consider the domain points from sine, that is x is greater or equals to minus pi by 2 to less or equals to pi by 2. But we cannot say in general that sine inverse and of sine x equals to x for all x belongs to R, because throughout R, this when we consider R as whole domain, this for this sine function, this function is neither 1 1 nor onto. So if we have sine inverse x equals to y, then we can say that x equals to sine y, because by composing or by composition of this sine inverse with sine, here we have to consider x for x is greater or equals to minus 1, less or equals to 1, while as here sine of y means we have to consider the domain of this sine, that is y is greater or equals to minus pi by 2 to less or equals to pi by 2. Here y is the principal value, because y lies between minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. That is simply when sine inverse x equals to y, where y is in interval minus pi by 2 to pi by 2, it is called as the principal value, and for this principal value this situation happens. Now here, what is the principal value of the sine inverse minus 1 by 2? Now if we put y equals to sine inverse minus 1 by 2, which implies that sine y is minus 1 by 2. You know that sine minus pi by 6 is minus 1 by 2, that is this, because sine minus pi by 6 is minus 1 by 2, which implies that sine y is sine minus pi by 6. Sine y is sine minus pi by 6, or we can simply say that y equals to minus pi by 6, which belongs to minus pi by 2 to pi by 2. You can here use sin x equals to sin y, implies that x equals to n pi plus minus 1 raised power n y. So but we have to consider, the only the principal values, and principal value is simply minus pi by 6. Minus pi by 6 belongs to this because it is minus pi by 6 is minus 30, and minus 30 lies between minus 90 to 90, hence the principal value is simply y, which is minus pi by 6. So this was all about this sine inverse x. Inshallah, in tomorrow's lecture we will discuss the cos and the cos inverse x. So thank you.